the Supreme Court ruled against Harvard University and the University of North Carolina's affirmative action policies. The court ruled that the race-based admissions at these universities was unconstitutional, and they also struck down Biden's student debt relief program. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjakovich, and we are Unapologetically Outspoken.
Hey everyone, welcome to Weird Wednesday. So today we are going to go over something that's been all over the news and is a pretty big deal, which is the Supreme Court ruling against affirmative action. So we're going to dive into that. And I think it's weird that we still have affirmative action in 2023. So let's just dive into what's been going on this week. On June 29th, the Supreme Court ruled against Harvard University and the University of North Carolina's affirmative action policies. The court ruled that the race-based admissions at these universities was unconstitutional, and they also struck down Biden's student debt relief program. Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion that the schools using race as a factor in admissions decisions violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And he wrote for the majority in the loan forgiveness case that the Biden administration has not received clear congressional authorization to issue the widespread forgiveness of thousands of dollars for many borrowers. No surprise there. And the group Students for Fair Admission sued the universities, one for a violation of the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment, and one for Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which guarantees color blindness, equal protection, and equality. Now, both rulings had the court 6 conservatives in the majority and the liberals in the minority. And Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson recused herself in the Harvard case because she's an alumni, making the ruling in that one 6-2, as opposed to the 6-3 ruling in the UNC case on the forgiveness program. So if you look at Harvard's admit rates by race and academic decile, a decile 10 African-American admit rate is 56.1%. While whites is 15.3% and Asian Americans is only 12.7%. In fact, Asian Americans admit rate in decile 10 is still lower than the African Americans rate in the academic decile 4, which is the lowest that they take at Harvard. So this is not equality at all. Like, this is clearly discriminating based on race, and Asian Americans are getting the worst of it. And Tara, to me, this seems super racist because Harvard is basically following a racial stereotype that Asians are good at math, for example, and that Black people aren't as smart as their white or Asian counterparts. And I think that these are just horrible stereotypes that are being reinforced over and over again in these universities with these policies.
Yeah, Stephanie, and let's be honest here. Affirmative action as a whole is inherently racist, whether it's pertaining to school admissions, applying for a loan, or applying for a job. The concept is basically saying, hey, you deserve privilege and a leg up in society for being a minority because we just don't believe you're smart enough or competent enough to earn a spot on your own merit. And this whole concept has played a massive role in the dumbing down of our country as a whole. Affirmative action is not equality of opportunity, it's the exact opposite. And I recently listened to a really great interview on an episode of American Thought Leaders with civil rights leader and activist Bob Woodson. He's the founder and president of the Woodson Center, which is a nonprofit research and demonstration organization that basically supports community development and neighborhood-based initiatives to revitalize low-income communities. And in this interview, he was talking about how affirmative action and the, quote, helping hand of the government have basically decimated Black communities. And when he was asked what he thought of the Supreme Court ruling, he said, quote, I'm just absolutely delighted because it ends the presumption that Black America is intellectually inferior and therefore can only achieve and advance if special privileges are extended to us. So I want to play this clip from the interview because he said some really things that should be eye-opening to people who think affirmative action is a good idea.
Affirmative action is part of the whole race grievance narrative. The assumption is that in order for Blacks to achieve, then we must dumb down the entry standards. For instance, the San Diego school system, 80% of the kids passed, but the 20%, there was a large concentration of Blacks because the kids flunked, they didn't do their homework. So what's the remedy? They did away with homework. If a smaller number of Blacks are achieving with honors, do away with honors programs. Thomas Sowell, in his recent book, talked about, it's called Charter Schools and Their Enemies. Every metric you could use for progress for the demographic, labor force participation, home ownership, wealth creation, college graduation rates, percentage of two-parent households, business development, in every one of these measures, from the end of slavery to 1960, Blacks were making progress every decade. All of this stopped in the 1960s when government massively intervened in the economy with the war on poverty, with all of the race grievance mechanisms. We spent $22 trillion on the poor, where 70 cents of those dollars went to the professionals who served the poor. So we created an industry out of serving poor, and poor became a commodity. And that's why the progress that Blacks have made, as Thomas Sowell pointed out, over the course of decades prior, not only did they cease to progress, but also we went in the other way, where these communities are decimated, that we're witnessing. But that is not the legacy of slavery and discrimination. We believe that set-asides and government programs can take the place of self-discipline and hard work. And that's why we're in this mess that we're in now. We have substituted hard work and self-discipline with set-asides and government programs.
Okay, so I think he's totally right. Affirmative action is basically telling people, don't strive for greatness because we're just going to give you a pass because of your race or ethnicity. You don't need to work hard. You don't need to develop self-esteem and self-confidence to know that you rightfully earned your place. And I think this just holds people down. And we all know how much I love to share clips from the Real AF podcast because, as Andy Frisella always says, don't be a hoe, share the show. And Andy, I share the show all the time. But his co-host name is DJ, and he's Black. And similar to Bob Woodson, he believes that ending affirmative action is a good thing. So in this episode, and this was from this past Saturday, Andy asked DJ his opinion on the whole affirmative action thing. And here's what DJ has to say.
Okay, Andy, last thing, let's get on this affirmative action.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do you think on that, dude?
Well, I got a couple of things. I think, first of all, I'm happy. I think it's far overdue. I think affirmative action should have been flipped. It's been in place for 60 years. And I think if anybody took the time to just look, right, like truly look at the data and look at the negative impacts that affirmative action has had, they will see that there is a direct negative correlation, increase of affirmative action, decrease in education standards, right? And predominantly the Black communities, right? Because those are the people who are benefiting, quote unquote, from affirmative action.
You're saying that the Black communities have become less educated because of affirmative action. And that's not just DJ saying that. According to the let me get the actual name real quick. Sorry. That's according to the American Council on Education. Okay, here's their chart. Right, break it down. Look at the stack difference between Black or African American when it comes to English level, math, reading, science, compared to the white students. Okay, bro, this is insane. All four subjects, the average for white students is 33%. All four subjects for Black students is 6%.
So you tell me how
that's unacceptable.
It's unacceptable. But that's the thing. But that's what this system. How do we get to this? We get because these are not the same numbers that it was 60 years ago, right? Like people forget. Like that's when we had a boom in Black education. We had Black HBCUs being developed, right? Like we were building schools. Those levels have declined. and they're declining because now there's no sense of drive, or even the drive to inspire to become.
There's no motivation.
No,
there's no standard to meet.
I can just get in because I'm black.
Right.
What do I have to read this book for? What do I have to 1 plus 1?
And then you got parents telling their kids that, hey, don't worry about it. You don't got to do that shit. You're going to get in anyway because of this.
Exactly. I want to throw this up.
Okay, so again, I agree with this. Affirmative action has basically just been a tool to keep people of color and minorities down. And I think a lot of people really don't realize what both DJ and Bob Woodson said is that how the Black populations were thriving and starting to come up before all of this shit with affirmative action was instituted. And since then, it's been a steady fucking decline.
Well, it's just like everything. When you look at liberal policies versus conservative, it's like, liberals will look at the intention. Well, there's a good intention here. Okay, intention means shit when the outcome is negative. You have to look at the outcome, the facts, the statistics, and all of them are pointing to the fact that this has not helped. So I love that they give those numbers, because at the end of the day, we have to look at outcomes. And if it's not making sense, then we should get rid of it. Absolutely. Now, Biden gave remarks basically saying that universities should work around the law, saying, quote, they should not abandon their commitment to ensure student bodies of diverse backgrounds and experience of all of America. What I propose is a consideration of a new standard where colleges take into account the adversity a student has overcome when selecting qualified applicants, end quote. And as he left, a reporter shouted out and asked whether this was a rogue court. And Biden replied, this is not a normal court, whatever that means. But Tara, isn't what he's saying basically affirmative action? I feel like he's telling universities not to listen to the Supreme Court and to just continue looking at race and background when making these decisions. Am I reading into this wrong?
Well, based on an article in the American Conservative, they agree, and so do I. The article was talking about how schools and activists are already trying to figure out ways to go around this decision. And it's likely that more schools are going to start ditching standardized tests and instead focus on things like personal essays and other subjective criteria as proxies for race. And that basically racial preference and admissions isn't going to go away. It's just going to go underground. And I read an article about Morehouse College in Georgia and how they responded to this decision. And I found it to be a little fucking ironic, because Morehouse is one of over 100 colleges and universities that are referred to as HBCUs. And that's what DJ had referenced in that clip I played. And HBCUs are historically Black colleges and universities. And in this article, the president of Morehouse, David Thomas, talked about how he was deeply disappointed by this decision, and it's a disservice to our nation and our nation's commitment to equity and equality. And he said, quote, affirmative action has long been an essential tool in the fight against systemic inequalities experienced by marginalized communities and has expanded access to educational opportunities that contribute to creating a more just society. At Morehouse College, we hold diversity as a fundamental principle that enriches the educational experience for all students, and we are steadfast in our belief that every individual should have an equal chance to succeed and thrive, regardless of their background or circumstances. Okay, really? Because that doesn't seem to be the case. It's very hypocritical. Even though students of any race and ethnicity can apply to go to an HBCU, admission is based on whether or not they meet the academic grade requirements. And I looked up the diversity breakdown at Morehouse College, and depending on which college stats site you look at, it's somewhere around 95% Black, and it's a primarily male college. They have very high standards. They only select students with high ACT and SAT scores. So why is it okay for an all-Black college to have high standards and admit people based on their level of competency, but other colleges and universities are expected to apply affirmative action principles?
My answer is white liberals. I can guarantee it's the white liberals that are virtue signaling, just like they do with everything else, that are putting these policies in place. And it's not actually, the Black community saying, hey, we're not smart enough to get in on our own. You need to help us and give us a leg up. It's some white liberal that thinks they're doing good or wants to virtue signal. And obviously it's not needed. And it's, like I said earlier, I think it's racist. I think that those are the true racists, the people that are putting these things in place. Um, and back to Biden, like with his remarks and everything, the other thing that happened this week is he went on MSNBC, and I don't know if you saw this interview or not, but like before the interviewer was even done talking, he just stands up and like they're still rolling, she's still talking, and he just starts wandering away. Like it was so awkward and it was so weird. And I don't even think he knows where he's at, let alone understands what affirmative action even was.
No, and I did see that interview, and he also confused the Declaration of Independence with the Constitution when he was criticizing the Supreme Court during their conversation, and he mentioned the war in 1960. What? First of all, FYI, Mr. President, it seems you need a history lesson. You might want to go back and listen to our Monday episode because the quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is a line from the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution. And Stephanie, don't you think the fucking leader of America should know the difference between two of the most important documents that define this country?
Cara, he doesn't even know what day of the week it is. He doesn't know what country he's in or how to exit a stage. So there's no way he knows about actual important things. I mean, come on.
Did you notice in the past week he has, when talking about the war in Ukraine, has continued to call it the war in Iraq?
Yeah, yeah. He has no idea what's going on. A kid asked him what the last country was that he visited, and it was like the day he got back from Ireland, and he had no idea what country he had been to last. And then you have Kamala that doesn't even know the difference between North and South Korea. So she, in a speech said we were like allies with North Korea. And then you have like their picks for federal judges that couldn't even answer Senator Kennedy's basic questions about this country's laws and constitution, like literally things we learn as eighth graders. So it's just a clown show in this administration, and they certainly have zero regard for the law. So it's no shock that they'll just ignore the Supreme Court and try to find loopholes to work around the law. And, as a female, I have actually benefited from affirmative action. In my very first job out of college, I was hired and I was so proud of myself for landing a good job until I started the job and found out that the company had an affirmative action policy in place. And whether I got the job because I was the best interviewer or a top student in my college that graduated with honors, I'll never know because I was a female and they had affirmative action. And every single guy that I worked with, including my manager at the time, made comments about me getting a job because I was female and how they have this stupid affirmative action policy. And honestly, I really don't blame them. I mean, I was a 22-year-old girl that had zero experience and replaced a 60-year-old man that had been with the company for 40 years. So, needless to say, I left that company and I would have just much rather them not even hired me if I wasn't truly qualified. Because hiring me like with this affirmative action, it just made my life hell. And I don't want anyone to have to go through that. And so, like, based on my experience with that, I have to assume that other people feel the same way. I mean, you get into an Ivy League school like Harvard and you don't have the same academic credentials and then have to wonder, like, do I truly deserve to be there? Do my classmates think that I deserve to be here, or do they think it's just because of affirmative action? And it really can mess with your self-esteem. Like, it's a hard thing to go through. And if you truly can't keep up with the course load compared to your peers and you fall behind because of that, that's not helping you either. So I don't think it's helpful any way you look at it.
No, I completely agree with you on this. And I know damn well that a lot of the opportunities that I had in my fire service and in my law enforcement careers were because I was female and it was affirmative action and there was a push for women on the job. And especially in specialized units where there weren't historically a lot of females. And why? Because some of those positions are fucking difficult and majority of women couldn't pass the test required to get into the unit. So what do? They changed the requirements and they made them easier so they could recruit more females, or they allow females to slide by and not perform as optimally as men who are competing. But you know what I did when I got into these units? I worked that much harder to be capable. And I know that at least I passed the basic exams before I got in. When I got into Metropolitan Division at LAPD, which was one of the most elite units in the department aside from SWAT, I got in because I was the only fucking qualified female who passed the test. And were there a lot of top male candidates who were more qualified than I was? Absolutely. And I got snubbed for months, and there were a lot of guys who never accepted me being there. And I think I mentioned this in a past podcast, but I was brought in with this group that I refer to as the Rainbow Squad because it was the picture of affirmative action. It was me, the female, a Hispanic guy, an Asian guy, a Black guy, and one token white guy. And the only thing I can say is that at least I was qualified to get in it, and I know I passed the test with the requirements that were there, and I was not allowed to slide by. Because what did they do 6 months later to get more females into the unit? They changed the prerequisite requirements, they changed the physical agility test, and they lowered standards to cast a wider net of pool of females to choose from. And they were females who were technically not qualified for the job. So yeah, it pissed the guys off, but it also pissed me off too, because all it was doing was showing that we're bringing women onto the job who really don't need to be here. So I've never fucking been in support of any of this affirmative action shit, even though it did help me in my career.
Yeah, well, and I would have to assume that the majority of people with a job in police force would be men. So it's like, it's probably an uneven ratio to begin with. So it's like, why would you have all these women joining these elite teams when the majority of people, like, it just doesn't make sense. Again, looking at the statistics. Now, Michelle Obama was thrown a lot of shade for tweeting how she was against the Supreme Court's decision and talking about how, affirmative action is needed, all like while she was on a yacht in Greece. So like she's on a yacht in Greece. She was the first lady for 8 years, but she's talking about being oppressed. And like people just think that that's outrageous. And I agree. Like, I think that she could be sending the message that affirmative action is no longer needed because we do have women and people at different, races in every facet of society, business, and government. And she could be giving this message of like hope and unity, but instead continues to tell people that they're oppressed and they need a leg up. And the one thing I do agree with, though, that I saw her post was the first paragraph of her statement, which read, quote, "Back in college, I was one of the few Black students on my campus, and I was proud of getting into such a respected school. But still, I sometimes wondered if people thought I got there because of affirmative action. It was a shadow that students like me couldn't shake, whether those doubts came from outside or inside their own minds," end quote.
Okay, so how can she say two different things in the same fucking statement?
Exactly. That is what I was wondering. Because I'm like, okay, that's exactly what I was just talking about. Like with affirmative action, there is this uncomfortable tension, and people question you whether you truly are there because of affirmative action or not. People will question it because there's affirmative action in place. And so it's just like if you take that affirmative action out of the equation, it takes away that question. And you don't have to second guess yourself, and people don't have to second guess you. And I think women and Black people that want to get into school can do so on their own merit. Like, I think if you don't agree with that statement, maybe you're the true racist. You know what I mean? It's like, I believe that anyone, despite your background or what you look like or where you're from, can achieve anything you want on your own merit. And you don't need a handout from anyone. And I just think that, the people that are preaching that you do, maybe they're the ones that have a stereotype and a prejudice in mind. That's just my opinion on it.
And I agree with you 100%.
So needless to say, I'm happy that, the Supreme Court made this decision. I think we're long past due to put this behind us. And we'll see where it goes from here. I'm sure we'll have a lot of commentary come out over the next, couple of days. But thank you guys so much for tuning in to our Weird Wednesday episode. And we will see you back here on Freedom Friday. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you get our latest episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you could, please rate and review the show. We are going to be reading every single review, and I would love it if you hopped over to Instagram at Unapologetically Outspoken and say hi. We want to see who's out there and start a conversation, plus get all of the topics that you want us to talk about next. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.